All right. Today got Hannah Nichol, founder and CEO of Main Impact. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Excited to be here, James. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. I'd like to just really just jump right into it. I know you have a big focus on like digital sustainability and marketing systems, but could you kind of just explain and share with us kind of like how did you get to where you are today with being like a heavy focus on branding, on marketing systems, and funnels? What kind of led you to starting and creating Main Impact?
Yeah, great question. I, like a lot of entrepreneurs, have had a very nonlinear journey. So it's always a fun conversation to kind of share this piece. But I originally, a lot of it started for me back when I was in college. It was 2016. I was a junior at the time, and I was actually on a mission trip with my university. We were in San Francisco. We were doing some outreach and providing services for the homeless community there. And I just remember being very struck by that experience and thinking that what I had been envisioning for my career just wasn't it. Like I needed to focus on something else, and I didn't know what I wanted to do because honestly, like who knows what they want to do when they're only, 19, 20 years old? Probably no one. Um, but I knew I needed to change the trajectory. Calling my parents New Year's Day and being like, "Hey, like I changing my career path. I'm actually going to graduate early. I'm going to shift everything." And I started freelancing right out of college. So I have always been very creative driven. I've always been an artist. And so I started with web development and branding, graphic design. Didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I knew that I wanted to make a difference. I knew I wanted to work with really impact driven brands. And so as I started working with clients on their websites and their graphics, I pretty quickly noticed that there is this disconnect between their marketing, their branding, their website. There wasn't really a cohesive system, and they had been doing really great work, but they needed to get their brand out there more. And so that really kind of kickstarted me down the path to expanding into the services now that we're offering today.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think that's actually a normal trick that I've seen for a lot, especially in the advertising marketing space. Like everything else, a lot of other industries kind of have different paths, but
Mhm.
so many go freelancer, figuring it out, trying to get any business they can, and then building up an agency as
Mhm.
they kind of, hone their craft and expertise. But what would you say, like, what's been kind of your main focus? Has it been like the branding and the web development and then design? And how do you guys create kind of more efficient systems around that now that you went from like freelancer to agency?
Yeah, initially, the bulk of our work was really around the website portion. So, how to build a website that is really focused on human centered design, user experience. I ended up going back to school to study user experience and front end development. So, that's a lot of the core of how that started for me personally. But really, that kind of systems thinking really tied in with the marketing piece. We were helping organizations make sure that their websites were effective, efficient, that they were driving leads, and all of that really tied into the marketing, right? So making sure that everything was cohesive, that your language, your messaging is the same across the board, that you're resonating with the right people. So a lot of the foundational work that went into the websites really translated into the marketing strategies that we were developing. So it was a pretty natural transition, and translated really well, actually. So now the bulk of our work is more marketing heavy, with the websites integrated into that as opposed to the opposite direction.
Yeah, because I think early on, a lot of people just wanted a website. They're like, we
Mhm.
just need a website. We have to have it. And they put it up and it was felt more like a brochure where it was
Yeah.
just like kind of an information dump talking about
Mhm.
themselves. And then I think
Yeah.
there's been this huge trend over the last couple of years of transitioning that to more what you're talking about, like more a
Mhm.
marketing driven piece of your puzzle that is just a step in the journey to getting a
Mhm.
customer. And I think that transition or thought process really changed the game for a lot of brands to actually it producing something rather than it just being a information dump of
Mhm.
what their brand or company is about. How have you found that have you found that to improved a lot of advertisers, a lot of clients' results when they go more of like, this is a piece of your marketing system and not just a random website that you have?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think a lot of that kind of changed in people's mindset around 2020 when everybody was sort of forced to switch things online. Like before then, most people knew they needed some sort of online presence, right? They knew they needed a website, a landing page. Like you said, it was more of a brochure. Now I kind of like to use the analogy of like it's your storefront, right? Like
Right.
you can have a physical location, but that doesn't necessarily mean people are going to come in the door or are going to know you're there. You have to do more than just have that location, right? So really, by focusing on the marketing piece first, you are ensuring that the website is just one aspect of that. That you're speaking to the right audience, that you're coming at the whole approach from clarity. And you're doing the research to make sure that your website is the most effective within your overall marketing strategy.
Yeah, and, like, has meaning and purpose for the customers or the traffic that you're sending. Because 'cause
Mhm.
I've seen it a lot happen because I live in the paid media space. We're our number one focus is on targeting audiences and driving them to websites, like, that's the piece that we handle, and I've seen so many times brands, clients have bad websites that don't convert, that don't speak to the problems that we're advertising and don't connect, and then they're mad at the traffic usually comes back to me that it's not converting, and I'm like, "Hold up, there's a this
Yeah.
piece of the puzzle, this bridge of your website to getting a customer is really
Mhm.
important, like, you have to convert that," and we tried to I took a stab at trying to do the web development and design and all that and funnel building, and it was, like, not our specialty at all, but I see so much value in that, is that, like, if you don't have that piece, you end up buying and giving Google and Facebook, all of
Mhm.
them all this money, but your landing page can't convert,
Mhm.
then you're basically paying for nothing at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a big part of why we kinda shifted more toward the marketing and the marketing funnel side, like you're saying, is a lot of people, unfortunately, when they're running their business, don't think about their overall systems and how important that is when it comes to your marketing and when it comes to your website. Because, like you said, you can pay for the ads all day long. You can have a social media presence all day long, but if you don't have like the internal systems and the processes nailed down, you're not going to convert, right? If you don't have the infrastructure in place to make sure that you're actually collecting those leads and nurturing them and moving them through that engagement funnel, it doesn't matter how many marketing tactics you do, you're not gonna solve that problem at the end of the day if you have a hole in the funnel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the leaky bucket problem, is
Yeah.
that you're pouring water in a bucket and it just keeps flowing out because you don't have that
Mhm.
integrated or that full system integrated in order to get them to stay on. Could you talk a little bit about, you kind of mentioned before what you're doing around like digital sustainability. Could you speak to that a little bit more of kind of what your focus is there and how you're doing that?
Yeah, that honestly, I could talk for like a whole hour just on that subject. It's something that I'm really passionate about. It is also something that is not like a huge focus in the conversation in the digital space right now. But a lot of people don't think about how your digital presence has a very tangible physical impact on the planet. So when we're thinking about the internet and websites, people are very used to just turning on their computer, being able to use it, looking something up on their phone, and don't always think about kind of the invisible portion, right? The internet is based on a physical infrastructure of, you know, the cables and all the data centers need a location, right? So everything we're doing digitally uses energy and creates carbon. So a lot of the kind of the focus that we're talking about when it comes to digital sustainability is making sure that you are using digital marketing responsibly, that you are using tools and platforms that are built to better the planet. And a lot of the things we're doing with digital sustainability are not only really great for the planet, but they're also really great business practices. One example of this when it comes to website development, because that's a big part of our work, is you know, where is your website hosted? Is the data center using renewable energy or not? That is a really easy switch that people can make when they're building their website, and they're hosting their platform. A lot of it too has to do with, are you compressing your images? Is it based on traditional UX practices to make sure that the load time is really fast? And when you have a really quick loading website, it not only reduces the energy strain, and reduces your carbon footprint, but it also creates a better experience for any users that come to your website, right? So a lot of digital sustainability is around the conversation of how can we improve things for our planet, but also overlaps with just great business practices and converting clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you can do both,
Mhm.
yeah, benefit on both sides. That's interesting. There's actually some media buying inventory that specializes in like green energy. So it's like you said,
Okay.
it's using data centers and places that are powered by solar and things like that. And you
Mhm.
can specifically buy inventory in that same way. So it's kind of the same concept. What you're doing for like websites, you can also buy specific inventory that is
Mhm.
supported and powered by green energy. So I've seen some of that side as well on the media buying.
Very cool.
But yeah, that's very interesting, and I don't think most people think about that, especially that really makes me think is in this age of AI, which is kind of the underlying nobody really wants to talk about it right now, but the AI is heavily sucking up a lot of energy
Mhm.
and because of the amount of power and the data centers and energy that it needs in order to compute the millions
Yeah.
of that happen. What's your kind of opinion or thought on kind of AI and how much energy it's using, and what do you kind of see as the trend that's going to happen there?
Yeah, that is a fascinating conversation to have too. I'm definitely not 100% anti AI. I think like when it comes to that conversation, a lot of it can be viewed as black and white, right? Like you're either for or you're against it. And the conversation is really more nuanced than that. I think it's really important to think about if a lot of these things are already set in motion, which they are. I think there are, last I checked, there were like 3,000 new data centers that are being built like in the US alone, right? So if these things are already kind of set in motion, how can we utilize them and harness them for good? And think about how to create those systems and that infrastructure in a way that's more sustainable. Like you mentioned, it uses a lot of energy, water, heating, cooling systems in order to make all of these operate, to train the LLMs. So thinking through the infrastructure side, the people who are building them, the legislation around that, but also as people in business and consumers, how are we then using those tools responsibly, right? So I think probably every platform that we're using in marketing has integrated AI in some way, whether like we like it or not, right? That's just kind of the reality. So thinking through like what are the tools that we can use to mitigate or offset some of the emissions from that, finding various tools that are integrating them in a more sustainable way or trying to tap into data centers that are trying to build in a renewable energies fashion. We actually built a digital sustainability toolkit. It's a free resource that has a bunch of these, really honestly, just these resources to find, what are different platforms that are sustainable and are focusing on being more eco friendly for our planet in the digital space. So a lot of things we could say about AI, but I think it comes down to making sure that we're using them responsibly. And as the future continues and all of this expands, just finding additional ways to make them greener.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just the use alone is like
Mm.
don't waste the use because it all draws a big impact. I think like
Mhm.
ChatGPT came out and said like, "Don't reply, just thank you." Uh,
Yeah.
at the end of your chat, that is not helping anything. It's just sucking
Mhm.
a lot more power from their whole grid and system.
Yeah.
I think it really comes down to like just being responsible. It's like not leaving trash out front.
Mhm.
Like while you're walking around. Don't just throw trash everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
be responsible the same way of, like, how much you're using it and why
Mhm.
you're using it and what's the final outcome of it because all of it's sucking a pretty big energy off of the grid and, using everything else. What's kind of one thing I wanted to ask you because I've seen this, I've experienced it, a lot of other agency owners have as well. It's like your transition from, like, being a freelancer, doing it on your own to building an agency. What have been your kind of approach, and how do you handle that kind of transition of being more like manager, leadership type
Mhm.
role versus you doing everything on your own?
Yeah, the I think some of the biggest things have been time, right? It doesn't all happen overnight. It takes a lot of intentionality to do that. Yeah, I think one of the kind of more pivotal moments in that transition was there was a client that came to us through another referral, somebody we had been connected with. They That was back when we were mostly focused on content creation and website development. and we were expanding into some additional marketing services, and they were smaller at the time and wanted to expand their marketing presence as well. And that was really pivotal in the transition from freelancer to agency because it opened up a lot of doors both like internally and externally, right? So they wanted to add some additional capabilities that we didn't have. It allowed us to tap into our network and bring in other people and expand maybe like 2 or 3 people on our team at the time, so it allowed us to bring in other people, and start creating systems for that, right? So how are we going to onboard people? What are our values that they need to align with? What's the expertise that we need to tap into in order to grow and to serve our audience better? So that client became a long-term retainer, and as they grew and our marketing produced results for them, we were able to grow alongside them. So that really shifted a lot of things on our end and helped us to create more formalized systems and frameworks around the services that we were offering.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, and then with that, like, how have you I think another big challenge always is, like, do you add on horizontally and grow on more services? Or do you try to grow, like, vertically of just, like, "We're gonna be the best at these few services?" What's been kind of your approach to deciding on that? Like, do you add on more services as your clients grow, they need more, then you add on things that you weren't doing before? Or have you focused on, like, "We're just gonna be the best at the web development, the branding, the funnels, all those things?"
Yeah, initially it was that focus on just a couple services. So the design side, the website side really got to be known for that. Had a really steady amount of referrals and business from that. And then as clients were a lot of it actually was we would work on these website projects for clients and they wanted to keep working with us. So we needed to develop additional services or ways to provide that for them. And like you mentioned earlier in our conversation, like you can't just have your brochure, right? Like you need to be driving traffic to your website. You need to have other pieces of marketing that are working alongside that for your business. So a lot of it was really organic as we were growing. We typically haven't added a service until we feel like it's really necessary. So whether that's a lot of people are continuing to ask for, paid advertising or something, right? Like making sure that we are not, expanding ourselves too much, that we're still focused on our industry, our niche, our core service offerings, but also looking for opportunities as the industry changes, right? So AI has been a big pivot in marketing. How are we going to leverage that, and what does that look like for us? So it's been a consistent growth, and it's been something that as we've needed to, we've continued to expand, but it hasn't been like a huge source of tension because of that. We've been very intentional with that.
Yeah, yeah, be very intentional with how you're piecing things together, what
Hmm.
services you're adding on, and then what technology you need to do that. And that's why I think that the AI piece is so interesting to me. See, right now, I think it does 2 things really well, I think, for agencies and people in, like, more service, digital, online businesses, is 1, it makes experts 10 times better at their job
Hmm.
because you can basically leverage and use it as a leverage point to do 10 times more output
Hmm.
than you were before. And then 2, I've noticed that new employees that don't have as much skill, you can get them skilled very quickly because they can use AI as a source of strength in order to build their skill set up, to do things that they wouldn't be able to do or you'd have to walk them through, do a lot of work to get them up to speed to be able to do. So it's like the 2 edges, it helps an immense amount
Hmm.
on those 2 fronts. But have you guys found to use AI in your agency?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think at first, at least personally, I was very, very cautious about it. We have always taken a very human-centric approach, and I do think that is it's a big asset for us, right? Like we are very values-driven, we are human-centered design. So for us, it's a matter of it's not going to replace us, but like you said, we're using it to, create more efficient processes, the things that maybe don't require that like creative human touch is how we're using it. So trying to optimize some of those things on the back end as opposed to using it for design and we're not going to use it to create a logo, but it can be really helpful when we're trying to refine or come up with some different strategic ideas or, I think it can be really helpful even for like brainstorming. We're a fully digital team and sometimes it can be a little bit easier and faster to, craft your AI prompt and get some additional feedback there before hopping on a call with somebody and, taking, 30 minutes or an hour in a meeting. So we're using it in more like efficient ways.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the best way to use it is what we're always trying to think about is what do humans do well and what do
Hmm.
machines do well? And how do we what's the merge of them both? And the interesting thing with AI is AI keeps doing more and more things that humans used to do really well. So that is continuing to grow, but the strategy, the human-centric focus, the connection, the emotional connection, the client work, the account management, like, all of those things are still of, like, highest demand and value, and we're just always trying to think of how do we leverage it so that we can do more of the things that really drive our business forward, that drive results and impact and
Hmm.
everything, but I'd say the
Absolutely.
one interesting thing out of it, though, is that we've really just been able to do 5, 10 times more than we were a
Yeah.
couple years ago, especially in the media buying space where so much of what we do is like leveraging data and optimizing campaigns,
Hmm.
doing all of those. We can really like AI is like heavily, integrated with that whole
Hmm.
system. So it just allows us to set up more campaigns, optimize more,
Hmm.
have a higher view of the strategy, of the direction of the campaigns, of the
Hmm.
creative, what creative's working, what's not, because those are things like AI still not telling us back. So we still have to have that a human kind of drive that forward. But those systems that are in place allow us to do just 10 times more. So I think that's been the biggest benefit that we've experienced.
Yeah, having AI help with the analytics and analyzing trends and things like that has been very beneficial. I think it's been a big game changer.
Yeah. That and just really, help really outline big thinking processes first of, like you said, like, being a brainstorming to bounce something off of, it is a really good because it can throw ideas out there you weren't even thinking about
Hmm.
because it can tap into so much content that's really already out there. But that's
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about it is that it can't really create anything new, in my opinion. It doesn't create anything new. It is purely like it is aggregating a bunch of content and synthesizing it and giving it to you, but it can't come up with a new idea
Hmm.
that I've seen up until this point that I've heard anybody talk about. Like if you ask anybody that's really deep in AI, can it create new ideas? I don't believe it can, at least yet. But I guess maybe that's the evolution of it, that maybe it will one day once it gets to a more advanced level. But still, new ideas, I think, still have to come from humans. I think that's the kind of human centric strategic piece that
Hmm.
is not being taken over anytime soon.
Yeah, and you are the one that's like in your business day in and day out, right? AI isn't going to be able to replace that. So you have eyes and ears in places that AI is never going to have.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What are you kind of looking forward to in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Your agency, kind of the marketing industry in general, kind of what do you see as kind of the big trends or happenings? Obviously, AI is one of them, but anything else that you're focused on as an agency owner that's kind of driving your agency forward?
Yeah, yeah. So other than AI, I think a lot about the quote from Martin Luther when he says that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I think about that in terms of what we're doing, how we're partnering with values driven organizations. And for us, that really looks like being intentional with our marketing. I really am hopeful that, especially because of AI, that people are going to continue to really seek out as consumers the human element, right? So a lot of people I think are starting to kind of pick up on what things are and aren't created by AI or being a little bit more skeptical. And so I think there's a really big opportunity in marketing and advertising to tap into the human side and to be very values oriented and purpose driven. So I'm really hopeful that that trend kind of continues in marketing. I think just with the inundation of media, right? Like you and I have talked about how it's 24/7. It doesn't shut off, but we as humans are not wired for that 24/7 being in touch with everything that's going on. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there to kind of take a step back with the marketing and advertising we're doing, be really focused, really targeted, and make sure that all the touch points that we are kind of putting out there in marketing are very intentional, and allowing people to kind of cut through that noise and see the things that really matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the only way for brands, especially in this day and age, especially if you don't have insane huge budgets,
Hmm.
is that there's so much competition for attention from consumers that if you don't have complete clarity and consistency in your message, like the ads don't work. I don't think the marketing funnel works, all of those things, because on average, people are getting 5,000 to 10,000 ads a day. So like that is an insane amount of competition from on every level. It's like you have to compete against your competitors, then you have to compete against all the big brands, every other brand, right? There's so much competition. Like everybody's competing for consumers' attention. That's really what all of the attention is. And I also wanted to mention too is I think you're totally right with the AI content. I've already seen studies come out where there's basically AI blindness. So someone sees content, the second they know it's AI, they scroll past it, unless it's
Hmm.
probably like really, really good. I bet some, people still watch it and but then you don't know that it's AI video. But there's AI blindness that's basically happening. And I compare that a lot to in our space, we had to deal with like banner blindness. That's why people don't really buy much display banner ads anymore. It's because people ignore them. It's like the second they know what it is, they ignore it and pass by. So it's like, how do you leverage some AI driven content, but really it being focused and human centered, like we
Hmm.
talked about, like,
Yeah.
and then using it I've heard some agencies use like a piece of their video that would have cost them like $1 million to produce, but they could
Yeah.
produce like 80% of it was human development, and
Hmm.
then they inserted a piece of AI because that saved them like hundreds of thousands of
Yeah.
dollars because it was like, some crazy sequence that happened in the video. So things like that I think are going to make a huge difference if you can have the right, somebody to really drive that creative strategy and
Hmm.
a process behind all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you mentioned, it still requires that human touch. We maybe in a couple years, we'll have this conversation again, and it'll be different with AI. But for now, you still have to have that human element.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you have one side I keep hearing people that are like, "Nope, AI is gonna take over everything. It's gonna do absolutely every single thing." And then I think there's gonna be a much more moderate level of what other people are saying is that it's going to solve certain problems, but it's not gonna solve all problems. And I think I'm a lot further on that side than the other.
Yeah, I think we've seen that with a lot of new technologies, right? There's always hype around the next new thing, and some of the hype dies out, and you kind of see how it actually falls.
You kinda mentioned different, like, hosting providers and service providers. Could you share like what's your list of like your tech stack of like what you see as like a really good tech stack for building a website, a marketing system, all of those?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different platforms that we can mention, and I will send you the digital sustainability toolkit that we have as well that you can link for
Yeah,
people to
thanks for that.
download. But
Yeah.
that's got a lot of them. So green hosting providers, we use one called Green Geeks. There's another one called SiteGround, and I believe Kinsta also has theirs on renewable energy. Usually, a web hosting provider will mention that on their website somewhere. So make sure to just search around if you're not sure. And then in terms of email marketing, we use a platform called EcoSend. It's very similar to a tool like MailChimp, but they are offsetting their carbon, they're building on renewables, and they plant a tree with every email that's sent. So they're focused on the sustainability sector, and we're big fans of their work. I'm trying to think other platforms that we're using. I think a big part of the equation too is just looking at where an organization's values are. You know, a lot of this conversation really comes around transparency and whether or not an organization is just being open about where they're at, right? So they might not be 100% sustainable right now, but a lot of organizations are outlining their steps to being greener, whether that's, um, working toward net zero by 2030 or some other commitment. I think a big part of exploring, which things to add to your wow, that was a
Tech
hard word to
stack.
say. Which things to add to your tech stack. Yeah, it really comes down to making sure that the organization aligns with your values and the things you're seeking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. I just had a conversation with somebody that we were talking about like purpose driven marketing, and you see it so much in the B2C space, right? So many
Mhm.
consumer, direct to consumer type brands have it where that's like they'll do like 1% for the planet or 1% of it goes to a charity or another organization. But you don't see it much on the B2B side. You don't see many like B2B platforms and companies that really drive the purpose driven marketing message and kind of having that piece of their system. So I want for you to see more of that kind of over the years. I
Mhm.
see you obviously found some
Yes.
that do it, but
Mhm.
yeah, I just don't see it as much compared to the direct to consumer space. I wonder if we're going to see that trend kind of start happening over the next coming years.
Yeah. I hope so. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, for businesses there, especially if as they're trying to differentiate in this space. And that is definitely something that we've seen for ourselves and for our clients. You can look at different studies on it. I think the one of the more recent studies from I think it was PwC showed that like 80% of the consumers they interviewed were willing to pay up to 10% more for products that were sustainable and aligned with their ethics and their values. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for any business in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we'll see that trend kind of start happening a lot more on the B2B side. If you could sit down with your younger self and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that have been?
Yeah, definitely a lot of things, but one of the biggest, I think, recommendations would be build in community, start networking early. Um, Entrepreneurship can be really hard and can be really lonely. And that doesn't necessarily mean like you have to start your business with a business partner, but it does mean make sure that you're not going it alone, right? Whether you are in community with other freelancers, entrepreneurs, or you just have somebody in your court who can be really honest and provide constructive criticism, right? Like you in entrepreneurship, you don't just need people to disagree with you on everything. You need some people who can really help to identify gaps and maybe poke holes in your argument, help you see things in a different way. And I think I had elements of that. But like I wish I had started seeking out mentors sooner who were further ahead from me. I think things like that could have maybe pushed me a little bit further along in my journey.
Yeah, or at least give you some shortcuts or avoid
Hmm.
some stones and boulders that you trip over along the way, but I couldn't
Always.
agree with that more. But yeah, the network and mentors are extremely valuable. I've been fortunate
Hmm.
to have really great mentors that I met early in my career and still know them to this day. But I love that. Yeah, that's really good. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Hannah. I appreciate your time today. We'll catch up soon.
Yeah, great to be here.
All right, bye.